He was a man forged in the killing fields of forgotten wars, a guardian shaped by fire and shadow. Yet the peace he sought was not on a battlefield, but in the silent cathedrals of the Pacific Northwest. A Navy SEAL, an operator, a weapon honed to a razor's edge, now searching for a quiet harbor from the ghosts that haunted the tide of his memory. His only anchor in this new world was Ragnar, a Belgian Malinois with eyes that held the same fierce loyalty as the men he'd served with. They had built a sanctuary of solitude, a fortress of pine and mist. But in a world of secrets, peace is a fragile currency. He was searching for stillness, but unearthed a conspiracy that threatened to burn his world to the ground. His dog, his partner, his only family, found a woman, barely clinging to life. And in that single moment, the warrior was awakened by a threat more immediate and deadly than any he had ever faced. They weren't just lost. They were being hunted, and the hunt was coming to his door. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. May God bless you and your families. The discovery was an offense against the silence. It began not with a sound, but with a scent on the wind, a discordant note of iron and fear that cut through the clean, wet smell of pine and damp earth. Former Senior Chief Petty Officer Jackson "Jax" Porter stood motionless, his senses, sharpened by 2 decades of hunting men in the dark, flaring to life. He was no longer a civilian enjoying his leave. He was an operator processing threat intelligence. Before he could consciously analyze the anomaly, Ragnar, his canine partner, had already locked onto it. The dog's body went rigid, a low, guttural growl vibrating deep in his chest. It wasn't the aggressive bark reserved for a bear or a cougar. This was different. This was the sound Ragnar made when he detected human wrongness. "Easy, boy," Jax murmured, his voice a low rumble, his hand resting on the dog's powerful shoulders. He didn't need to give a command. They were a single entity, their movements economical and precise. Ragnar led, nose to the ground, a black and tan missile of purpose. Jax followed, his footfalls silent on the mossy forest floor, his eyes scanning, cataloging, and dissecting the terrain. They moved through a thicket of ferns, their vibrant green a stark contrast to the grim task at hand. And then he saw her. She was collapsed near the base of an ancient cedar, half hidden by the overgrown brush. A splash of color, a torn blue jacket that didn't belong. Jax's approach was a study in tactical caution. He moved in a slow, deliberate arc, clearing his angles, his mind a cold, calculating machine processing possibilities. Ambush? Trap? Bait? Ragnar stayed at a low ready, whining softly, the sound a mix of agitation and concern. As Jax drew closer, the details sharpened into a horrifying picture. The woman was alive, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her face was bruised and streaked with dirt, her dark hair matted with blood from a gash on her temple. A length of thick zip tie was cinched cruelly around one wrist, the other end severed. She hadn't just fallen, she'd escaped. Jax knelt, his fingers going to her neck, finding a pulse. Thready, but there. Hypothermic, dehydrated. He was a weapon without a target, a protector without a charge. That was about to change. He looked from the woman's pale face to the deep woods that surrounded them, a chilling certainty settling in his gut. Whoever did this was still out there. They would be back to finish the job. His sanctuary was about to become a kill box. Jax's cabin was not a home. It was a forward operating base, built with his own hands on a secluded plot of land overlooking a churning grey inlet. It was a testament to his paranoia and his skill. Reinforced doors, strategic sightlines, a hidden cache of weapons and medical supplies that would make a small-town police department blush. He carried the woman with a practiced ease that belied the urgency of the situation, Ragnar pacing at his heels, a vigilant shadow. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of cedar and gun oil. He laid her gently on the thick bear pelt in front of the stone fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across her still form. His movements were fluid, devoid of hesitation. He was in his element. The fog of civilian life had burned away, replaced by the ice-cold focus of the mission. Triage. He cut away the damp sleeve of her jacket, his K-bar knife moving with surgical precision. The wound on her arm wasn't from a fall. It was a deep, clean slice, defensive in nature. He found another on her leg, crudely stitched. He worked silently, cleaning the wounds, applying field dressings, his hands steady. His mind, however, was a whirlwind. Who was she? He found a wallet in her jacket pocket, a driver's license, Dr. Aris Thorne, Seattle, Washington, an ID card for a monolithic corporation, Omnigen Dynamics. The name sparked a flicker of recognition. A tech giant, a defense contractor, a company with a reputation for ruthless ambition and a veil of secrecy. He ran an IV line, the bag of saline hanging from a hook on the stone mantelpiece. As he worked, he spoke to Ragnar, his voice the only sound in the room besides the crackle of the fire. They were pros, buddy. The knot on that zip tie, the wound, they weren't amateurs. They wanted her alive, but they weren't gentle about it. Ragnar whined, nudging Jax's hand with his wet nose, his intelligent eyes fixed on the unconscious woman. He was a guardian, same as Jax. It was their nature. Jax stood and moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass into the encroaching dusk. The mist was thickening, swallowing the trees. It provided cover, but cover worked both ways. He felt it then, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, the same prickle on his skin he'd felt 1,000 times. Before stepping into a hostile zone, they were being watched. He didn't need to see them to know they were there, closing in, probing his defenses. His hand went to the Sig Sauer P226, holstered at his side. The comfortable weight was an old friend. His quiet life was a memory. His legacy of violence had followed him home. The war had found his sanctuary. The first shot was a whisper, a subsonic round thudding into the log wall just inches from the window frame. It wasn't a warning. It was a range finder. Jax didn't flinch. He dropped below the window line, moving with a terrifying fluid grace. "Ragnar, watch her," he commanded in a low tone. The dog immediately positioned himself between Aris and the door, his body low, a silent promise of violence. Jax slid along the wall to his weapons locker, a reinforced steel cabinet disguised as a wood pantry. He keyed in the code, the tumblers clicking softly. Inside, an arsenal rested in custom-cut foam. He bypassed the hunting rifles and shotguns, his hands going directly to the Heckler & Koch HK-4116, the rifle he'd carried through hell and back. He slapped a magazine into the well, the click echoing in the tense silence. He screwed a suppressor onto the barrel, the movement practiced and sure. Another suppressed shot, this time shattering the glass of the kitchen window. They were bracketing him, trying to force him into a corner. Amateurs. They thought he was a civilian, a hermit. They were about to learn how wrong they were. He slung the rifle and crept to the back of the cabin, to a small, unassuming door that led to the crawlspace beneath. It wasn't just a crawlspace. It was an escape tunnel, leading 50 yards out to a concealed position in a rocky outcrop. He was a protector, and a protector always had a way out. He paused, listening. The soft crunch of a boot on gravel, the rustle of tactical gear, at least 3, maybe 4, moving in a standard diamond formation. They were disciplined, but overconfident. He slipped out the back door, closing it silently behind him. The night air was cold, the mist clinging to him like a shroud. He moved through the darkness, a ghost in his own backyard. He didn't return fire. He was escaping. He was a weapon without a target. No, that wasn't right. He had a target now. He circled around, using the terrain he knew better than the back of his own hand. He came up behind the point man, a dark shape against the faint glow from the cabin windows. Jack's was a shadow, a breath of cold air. He dispatched the man with brutal, silent efficiency. 1 down. He retrieved the man's radio, listening to the clipped, professional chatter. They were calling themselves harvesters. They were reporting his position as still inside the cabin. He smiled grimly. He moved to the next man, a specter of vengeance in the misty woods. He was no longer just a guardian of a quiet piece of land. He was the guardian of the woman inside. And these men had violated his sanctuary. They would pay the price. Dr. Aris Thorne woke to the smell of wood smoke and antiseptic. For a moment, she was suspended in a disorienting fog, her body a symphony of aches. Then, memory returned in a brutal, jagged rush. The sterile room, the man in the expensive suit, Silas Croft, his voice like polished stone, the needle in her arm, the rough hands dragging her into a black van, the desperate, terrifying escape into the wilderness. She sat up with a gasp, her eyes flying open. She wasn't in the forest. She was in a rustic, masculine room, lying on a soft fur rug before a roaring fire. A massive dog, a creature of pure muscle and focused intelligence, lifted its head and watched her with unblinking brown eyes. A man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, built with the dense, functional muscle of a predator. He moved with an unnerving silence. He held a rifle in one hand as if it were an extension of his body. His face was hard, carved from granite, but his eyes held a storm of controlled intensity. "You're safe. For now," he said, his voice a low gravel. It was economical and direct, a voice that wasted nothing. "Who are you?" Aris asked, her own voice raspy. "The man whose day you just ruined," he replied, though there was no anger in his tone, only a flat statement of fact. He knelt and offered her a canteen. "Water. Drink it slow." She did as she was told, the cool liquid a balm on her raw throat. "They'll come back," she whispered, fear coiling in her stomach. "They already did," he said, his gaze flicking to the window. "They're not coming back." The finality in his words sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't boasting, he was reporting. "Why were they after you?" he asked, his question a demand, not a request. He needed intel. He needed to define the battlefield. Aris hesitated, the ingrained caution of her life's work warring with the instinct to trust this silent, dangerous man. But she saw the bodies outside. She saw the way he moved, the way the dog watched him, the way the entire cabin felt like a fortress built by a single, determined will. He was her only hope. "My name is Aris Thorne. I'm a lead researcher for Omnigen Dynamics." At the name, the man's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I found something. Something they've been working on in secret. A biological agent. It's not just a weapon. It's a reset button. A way to control a legacy. Their legacy. I took the data. the only existing copy. Her father had been a scientist for Omnigen, too. He died in a lab accident years ago, an event that had always felt wrong. She was continuing his legacy, his search for truth. Now she understood. He hadn't had an accident. He'd been silenced, just like they were trying to silence her. The man, Jax, absorbed this, his face unreadable. He looked from her to the fire, then to the loyal dog at his side. He had sought peace, a sanctuary from the world of men like Silas Croft. But the world had followed him. He was a protector. It was who he was. The choice had already been made. He had to see this through. "Pack what you can carry," he said, his voice hard as iron. "We're leaving." The transition from guardian of a sanctuary to fugitive was seamless. Jax moved through the cabin with a quiet, lethal purpose, his actions stripped of all sentimentality. This place was no longer a home. It was a compromise position. He pulled a worn olive-drab duffel bag from a closet, the material faded from years of hard use in deserts and jungles across the globe. Into it went the essentials: a trauma kit, extra ammunition, ration bars, a water purifier, a satellite phone, and a compact GPS unit. He paused, his eyes falling on a small framed photo on his nightstand, the only personal item in the entire cabin. It was of him and his SEAL team, their faces young and grinning, arms slung around each other. Men who were gone now, ghosts in the machine. He left the photo where it was. The past was a weight he couldn't afford to carry. Not now. Aris watched him, a mixture of fear and awe in her eyes. He was like a force of nature, his every movement a study in brutal efficiency. He handed her a spare jacket, thicker than her own, and a pair of sturdy boots. "They'll be too big. Cinch them tight," he ordered. He didn't offer comfort, only practical solutions. Survival was the only currency that mattered. While he packed, he gave her a clipped, concise briefing. The men outside were professionals, PMCs, private military contractors. That means your boss, Croft, has deep pockets and no ethics. They'll send a second wave, better equipped, probably with someone who knows how to hunt people like me. We can't stay on the roads. We can't use your name or credit cards. As of right now, Aris Thorne is a ghost. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "And so am I." He then turned his attention to Ragnar, kneeling to run a hand over the dog's back. "All right, boy. Time to go to work. Search and evade." The dog seemed to understand perfectly, his tail giving a single, tight wag. Jax retrieved a small silver whistle from a drawer, an ultrasonic whistle, its frequency audible only to the dog. It was their silent line of communication, a small, significant object in the midst of chaos. He slung the duffel bag, grabbed his rifle, and nodded towards the door. The juxtaposition was stark. The warm, fire-lit cabin, a brief illusion of safety against the cold, hostile wilderness that awaited them. The opulent life Eris had known, a world of clean labs and corporate expense accounts, versus this grim, primal struggle for survival. As they stepped out into the damp, chilling air, Jax took one last look at his sanctuary. He felt a pang, not of loss, but of anger, a cold, concentrated rage. They had taken this from him. They had brought their war to his peace. He would make them regret it. The hunt was on, but the roles were about to be reversed. He wasn't just the prey. He was the protector, and the protector was now the hunter. Miles away, in a room that cost more than Jax's entire plot of land, Silas Croft stood before a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering sprawl of Seattle. The city lights were a galaxy at his feet, a kingdom he had built on data, ambition, and a complete lack of moral restraint. He held a crystal glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. The room was a monument to his ego, minimalist art, Italian leather, and technology so seamlessly integrated it was almost invisible. The world was not a sanctuary. It was a cage, and he held the key. His phone buzzed, the sound a discreet, expensive purr. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Report." The voice on the other end was strained, laced with static and failure. "Sir, Alpha Team is dark. No comms. We have boots on the ground at the last known location. It's compromised." Silas took a slow sip of his scotch, his expression unchanged. He was the foil to Jax's stoicism, his arrogance a brittle shell around a core of pure narcissism. "Compromised is a corporate euphemism for slaughtered, is it not, Mr. Hansen?" "Sir, the asset was being sheltered. The occupant, he's not a civilian. The scene is tactical." "Of course he's not a civilian," Silas said, a flicker of annoyance in his voice. The universe has a tiresome sense of irony. Dr. Thorne, a woman of science, runs into the arms of a barbarian. He swirled the scotch in his glass, watching the liquid cling to the sides. He saw people as instruments. Dr. Thorne was an instrument that had malfunctioned. This new variable, this barbarian, was simply a tool that needed to be broken. "The prototype data she is carrying represents the culmination of my family's legacy. It is the key to a new world order, my world order. Its recovery is not a request, it is an absolute. I don't care about the cost, and I certainly don't care about the mess." He paused, his voice dropping to a chillingly calm register. "I want you to activate Sentinel. Tell him the target is a former Tier 1 operator. Name unknown. Tell him to take the K9 as well. I want them erased. I want the ground salted. I want nothing left but a bad memory. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir. Sentinel is wheels up in 20. The line went dead. Silas Croft placed his phone down on the polished marble table. He looked out at his city, a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips. He had built an empire by eliminating threats, by turning liabilities into footnotes. This would be no different. This quiet protector and his dog were a loose end, and Silas Croft did not tolerate loose ends. The game had just been escalated. The forest was a suffocatingly dark labyrinth. Rain fell in a steady, miserable drizzle, soaking through their jackets and chilling them to the bone. For 2 days, they moved, Jax setting a grueling pace. He pushed them hard, fueled by adrenaline and a grim determination. He knew the clock was ticking. He knew a more dangerous hunter was on their trail. They communicated in whispers, or more often, with simple hand signals. Aris, to her credit, kept up. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was being tempered by a growing resilience. She was a scientist, an analyst. She observed, and she was observing a master at his craft. Jax moved through the wilderness, not like a man passing through it, but like a man who was part of it. He read the terrain like a map, using every ridge, creek, and shadow for cover. Ragnar was their early warning system, a silent scout who ranged ahead, his senses 1,000 times sharper than any human's. He would reappear as silently as he had vanished, communicating with a look, a posture, a low whine that only Jax seemed to fully comprehend. Late on the second night, they found a temporary sanctuary, an abandoned Forest Service lookout tower perched on a high, wind-swept ridge. It was a dilapidated skeleton of wood and glass, but it was shelter, and more importantly, it offered a commanding view of the surrounding terrain. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Jax quickly and efficiently secured the structure, wedging the door shut and covering the broken windows with a spare tarp. He got a small, smokeless fire going in a rusty old stove, the meager warmth a blessing. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the drumming of the rain and the whisper of the wind. The tension that had been a constant companion for 48 hours began to ease, just slightly. "You never told me your name," Aris said softly, breaking the silence. "Jax," he replied, his eyes on the flames. "Just Jax." "You were a soldier." "It wasn't a question." "Something like that," he said, his voice distant. He was a guardian, a protector, but the cost of that duty was etched onto his soul. He looked over at Ragnar, who was curled up at his feet, asleep but still alert. He reached down and stroked the dog's head, his touch surprisingly gentle. The dog was the only living thing he allowed himself to be truly open with. With Ragnar, there was no judgment, only loyalty, a true, uncomplicated legacy. "He's family," Jax said, more to himself than to her. Aris saw it then, past the hard exterior, past the operator. She saw the quiet, internalized, emotional core of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, a man who had tried to build a wall around himself only to have the world tear it down. "What you're doing, protecting me, thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jax just nodded, his gaze returning to the fire. The mission was the only thing that mattered. But for the first time in a long time, the mission felt like more than just a duty. It felt like a purpose. The attack came just before dawn. The rain had stopped, and a thick, disorienting fog had rolled in, blanketing the ridge in a sea of white. It was the perfect cover for an assault. Ragnar was the first to know. He shot to his feet, a low, menacing growl rumbling in his chest, the fur on his back standing on end. Jax was instantly awake, his hand already on his rifle. He moved to the edge of the tarp-covered window, peering out into the swirling grey. Nothing, but he trusted the dog implicitly. "Sentinel is here," he said, his voice grim. The name he'd overheard on the dead man's radio. The specialist. Aris's blood ran cold. "How do you know?" "I can feel it." It was the truth. It was the same feeling he'd get in the mountains of Afghanistan right before an ambush. The air grew heavy, charged with a deadly stillness. Then, a flicker of movement in the fog, a dark shape moving with the same predatory grace as Jax himself. This was not a team of PMCs. This was one man, an apex predator sent to hunt another. "Get down! Stay away from the walls!" Jax ordered Aris, his voice a blade of command. He slipped out the back of the tower, melting into the fog. This was his element. A close-quarters battleground with limited visibility. A knife fight in a phone booth. He moved in a wide, circling pattern, his rifle at a low ready. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water from the trees. He could hear his own heartbeat, a steady, rhythmic drum. He was calm, focused. The world narrowed to this single, lethal chess match. He saw a boot print in the mud. Fresh. The hunter was circling, too. Each man was trying to get behind the other, to gain the superior position. It was a dance of ghosts in the mist. Jax ducked behind a large boulder, controlling his breathing, listening. A twig snapped to his left, a deliberate sound, a feint. The real attack would come from the right. Jax didn't fall for it. He remained perfectly still, a statue of coiled lethality. A suppressed shot whizzed past his head, striking the boulder with a sharp crack. It came from the right, just as he'd anticipated. Jax didn't return fire. He used the muzzle flash to pinpoint the enemy's position. He broke cover, not away from the shot, but toward it, closing the distance with shocking speed. He rounded a cluster of trees and came face to face with his adversary. The man was dressed in black tactical gear, his face obscured by a balaclava. He was fast, raising his rifle, but Jax was faster. The ensuing fight was not a firefight. It was a brutal, close-quarters ballet of violence. It was blocks, strikes, and grapples, each man a master of his deadly art. But Jax had a partner. With a guttural roar, Ragnar burst from the fog, a 40-kilo projectile of teeth and fury. The dog latched onto the attacker's gun arm, the sickening crunch of bone echoing in the clearing. The man screamed, a raw sound of pain and surprise. It was the opening Jax needed. The fight ended as quickly as it began. In the silence that followed, Jax stood over the fallen hunter, his breathing heavy. The protector had faced his opposite and had won. But the victory felt hollow. This was just a soldier. The king, Silas Croft, was still safe in his castle. In the grey light of dawn, the fog began to burn off, revealing the aftermath of the battle. Jack stood over the body of Sentinel, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He recognized the man's gear, the specific modifications to his weapon. They had been in the same elite circles, ghosts passing each other in classified hallways. This man was a legend, a boogeyman sent to fix problems, and Croft had sent him after them as if he were swatting a fly. The sheer disposable wealth and power it represented was staggering. Aris emerged from the tower, her face pale but resolute. She looked at the scene, her eyes wide with a grim understanding of the world she had just been dragged into. She walked over to Jax, her gaze not on the dead man, but on him. "Are you okay?" she asked. The question hung in the air, simple and profound. No one had asked him that in a very long time. "I'm operational," he replied, the standard, deflective answer. But he met her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of the operator slipped, revealing the weary man beneath. He searched Sentinel's body, his movements efficient and impersonal. He found a satellite phone with an encrypted tactical map. On it, a single red dot pulsed over their current location. A second blue dot was moving away, back toward the city. A support team or an exfil plan. But more importantly, he found what Aris had risked her life for. Tucked into a waterproof pouch on the man's belt was the small silver hard drive she had taken. The legacy, the prototype data. He held it in the palm of his hand. It was small, insignificant, yet it held the power to upend a corporate empire and expose a monster. He looked at the hard drive, then at Aris, then down at Ragnar, who sat faithfully at his side, his body language a silent question. What now, boss? This was it, the decision, the moment his life would pivot. He had the proof. He could give it to Aris, and they could disappear. He could find another patch of wilderness, build another sanctuary, and try again to outrun the ghosts. He could go back to being a weapon without a target, a guardian with nothing to protect. The thought was nauseating. It felt like a betrayal of everything he was. He looked at Aris's determined face, the face of a woman who had been through hell and had come out stronger, a fierce warrior in her own right. He looked at Ragnar, his loyal partner, who had trusted him without question. His sanctuary wasn't a place. He saw that with chilling certainty. It had never been the cabin or the quiet woods. His sanctuary was the mission. His peace was found in purpose. He was a protector. It was his core identity, his own personal legacy. He couldn't run. He wouldn't. He closed his hand around the hard drive, the cool metal of firm and final commitment. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low, but filled with a newfound, ironclad resolve. "We're not running anymore. We're hunting." The drive back towards Seattle was a declaration of war. The battered pickup truck, which Jax had stashed in a nearby town for emergencies, ate up the miles of blacktop, a stark contrast to their silent, grueling trek through the wilderness. The mood inside the cab had shifted. The desperate, defensive tension had been replaced by a sharp, offensive focus. They were no longer the hunted. They were a wolf pack of three, moving with singular purpose toward the heart of the enemy's territory. Jax drove, his eyes scanning the road, the mirrors, the sky. His posture was relaxed, but alert, the posture of a predator conserving energy before the final strike. Aris sat in the passenger seat, the hard drive connected to a ruggedized laptop Jax had pulled from his go-bag. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. She was back in her element, not as a victim, but as the brilliant scientist she was, decrypting the data, building the case that would bring Silas Croft's empire crashing down. "It's all here, Jax," she said, her voice a mixture of horror and vindication. "Project Midas. It's a targeted bioweapon designed to attack specific genetic markers. Croft wasn't just developing it for sale. He planned to use it, to clear out entire populations he deemed undesirable, for land acquisition, for market control. He calls it legacy assurance." The sheer sociopathic scale of it was breathtaking. It was a plan for corporate-sponsored genocide. Ragnar lay on the bench seat between them, his head resting on Jax's thigh. He was calm, sensing the change in his master. The frantic energy of the escape was gone, replaced by the calm, deadly certainty of the hunt. This was familiar territory for the dog, the quiet before the storm. Jax listened to Aris, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He had spent his life fighting men who believed in twisted ideologies, who sought to impose their will on the world through violence. Silas Croft was no different. He just wore a more expensive suit. The city skyline appeared on the horizon, the glass and steel towers of Omnigen Dynamics rising like a fortress in the center. It was a daunting sight, a symbol of untouchable power. But Jax felt no fear. He felt a cold, clear purpose. He was a guardian. He had a charge to protect, not just Aris, but the countless innocent people who would be victims of Croft's ambition. This was his new mission, his true sanctuary. He reached over and squeezed Aris's shoulder. "Find me a way in," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an unbreakable promise. "I'll handle the rest." Aris looked from the laptop screen to the determined, unwavering profile of the man beside her. She nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. They were a team, a scientist, a soldier, and a dog, an unlikely alliance against a titan, and they were going to win. The fight for the soul of a legacy had begun. Comment Amen below if you believe in the power of loyalty and purpose. God blesses you and your families, and may you always have a guardian watching over you.